change. Yeah. Okay, so when I kind of sat down to think about how to set this themes up in the class, of course, I wanted to pick something that you're probably going to hear about again, something that's relevant. I wanted to pick things that sort of included a lot of topics because you have to really, this is the one biology class you're going to take in college, so I wanted you to learn about cells. I wanted you to learn a little bit about the human body. I wanted you to learn about organisms and evolution. And I wanted you guys to learn about ecology. Okay, and so this last theme is really the theme that's about ecology. Okay? And so this is really big picture. Big picture biology. Okay? This is what's going on with the whole Earth. Okay, this is like not. We started really with little teeny weeny cells, the organelles inside of the cells. Talked about how they kind of work together to determine who you are, determine if you get cancer. Talked a little bit about how that can even affect how your genes can even affect whether or not you become addicted to something. Ecology is sort of like the broadest picture. And this picture was taken, I think, in the 60s, right, when they first went to the moon. And this was the first time that a person had ever been out where they could look back and see the entire Earth in one view. Okay? Because when you're here, the Earth seems like this really huge place, right? Seems like we could just, it's limitless. We can use all the water. We can continue to cut down forests. If we cut down this forest, guess what? There's another forest over here, right? We dig up this area and plant crops, no problem. Just over the hill, there are more areas. But this was the first chance to really see that the Earth is not that huge and it's not limitless. Okay, and so that's kind of, I feel like it's a good starting place for this idea of climate change. Okay, this is something, actually I don't hear about it as much as I used to. But if the scientists are right, more than any of the other things that we've learned about in here, this one is going to affect you guys, particularly, probably your kids, right? If the scientists are right, this is going to be a really big one. Okay, and that is all the changes that are going to happen inside of this planet as a result of human activities. Okay, so just like the other themes, we're going to build up to it. Right? You got to understand some of the underlying principles and mechanisms before the big picture makes sense. Okay, and so that's today. We're going to just I'm going to introduce you to the idea of what ecology is, different levels of ecology, some of the basic things that that affect distribution of life on Earth. Right. This one thing that's for sure is politicians might not agree. The average citizens might not agree. It's interesting, today is election day, and this is one of the big contrasts between our two political parties, is how do we proceed considering what scientists are telling us, right? What's going on the Democratic side, you guys have heard of the Green New Deal, right? This is basically a way to completely alter the way we really work as a country and our economy, and particularly energy. And why would we want to do the Green New Deal? Because of this idea that there's going to be a rapid, well, we're actually already seeing this rapid rise in temperatures. Okay. And the other side says basically, yeah, we're here, we are altering the Earth, but the Earth is so big that it's really impossible for humans to alter the whole climate to the degree that the scientists are telling us, and that there are natural fluctuations in the climate. And what we're seeing now is just a part of that, right? So those are sort of like two ends of the extremes with our view of this topic, right? And the way that we proceed, the actions that we take now are going to have a big impact later. Okay. We'll talk about what the greenhouse is, what are some evidence that this is happening, and what are the implications will be, and then finally we'll talk about what are some things that can be done about it. Okay. Again, in terms of this idea that it's just a natural cycle of things, has the Earth gone through cycles in the past of temperature change? What do you guys know anything about that? Has there been big fluctuations in the Earth's climate in the past? Yeah, unquestionably, right? The whole northern half of North America was covered by 2 feet of ice, or not 2 feet, 2 miles of ice. Where I grew up in northern New York, there were glaciers that came all the way down to West Virginia. Yeah.
What about the past few years being the hottest on record?
Okay. So you can, this is kind of it's an issue of scale, right? If we look at it in a small scale, then you get one story. And if you look at it at large scales, right, there have been a lot of fluctuations through time, right? So the question is, if we zoom in on one little part of this, how does what we're seeing match up? And so what in the last year, I think it was last year, 2019, was the hottest year ever recorded on the face of the Earth, right? Global average temperature, which was only slightly hotter than 2018, right? So we are, and I think that 2020 is on, it's definitely on the course to be among the hottest years. So that what we're seeing is really the rate of warm up, right? That is to say, the increase is so rapid, and that's probably the most alarming thing. That we did have ice age, right? And after the ice age, things started to warm up, obviously. But the rate at which it's warming now is faster than it did after the ice age. Okay. So, but we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. We will talk about this, particularly in the case study for this theme. Really gets into some of the evidence more. But today we're kind of focusing on the underlying stuff, the concepts that really make this make sense. But I guess this is the introduction, right? So we're saying we're already seeing the effects of this. Okay. When did people start talking about global warming? You think that term was coined? Is this something that only has been discussed the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 200 years? When do you think people started to, this came into a consciousness to say, ooh, we might want to think about how we're behaving on Earth? Probably in the 80s, so maybe 30 years, right? That somebody said, okay, we're adding a lot of stuff to the atmosphere, and that might have an impact on things like climate, things like temperatures, things like wind patterns, which are going to affect wildfires. They're going to affect heat waves, when and where it rains, right? When and where it doesn't rain. Whether it rains gently or whether we have monsoons and downpours, right? These are the kind of things they made predictions 20 years ago. If the Earth is warming, this is what we predict to see. The predictions are coming to fruition, okay? Look at California this year. Been experiencing long-term drought. Wildfires are more intense than have ever been seen. Right? So some of the predictions are proving to be accurate. Okay. And so, I've heard a lot of people say, and again, where I grew up, Dominic, you said your family's from the Buffalo area,
Rochester.
Rochester. People in Rochester will be like, okay, he wants to warm up a little bit, I'm okay with that, right? It's damn cold up there. So we'd say, well, and what did, you guys remember what the predictions for the amount of temperature rise is supposed to be? What was the average temperature supposed to increase? 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit has risen on average. Is that a lot? 1.4 degrees, so in other words, it's gonna be 65 instead of 64. Right? Is that a huge thing? In our brains, it's kind of like, well, who cares, right? But the thing is that the Earth is very finely tuned. The ecosystems are very finely tuned. And so what we see is when you change one thing, it has very many webs that kind of spin out from it. And so the impacts are very complex and they're unpredictable, right? This guy, John Muir, he's sort of the founder of the Sierra Club, kind of a famous writer when it comes to environmental type sciences. He said, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it is hitched to everything else. So that is really why this is an ecological problem. Because we see temperature affects climate, precipitation, which affects just so much. Everything is this interconnectedness. That's going to be a theme within the ecology here. Ecology, broadly defined, a scientific study of the interactions between organisms and their environment. Ecology is the study of the abundance and distribution of organisms on Earth. Okay. So where do you find organisms? Plants, fungus, bacteria, humans, and how many of them are there? Okay. What determines those things? What determines where humans can live? Right. That's the kind of things that fall under this study. Ecology, study of ecology. Okay. And again, thinking about the biosphere, the whole planet scale of things, we have this kind of feedback where humans are definitely, what are some important resources that determine where humans can live? Where is human population the most dense? What parts of the Earth? What kind of things affect that? Look real quick at a map, a global map of human, global map, do this, global map of human population. What is someplace where there's a lot of people? Damn it. With the dark colors, lots of people. And there's some patterns we see here. When we look at the flip side, what kind of places on Earth do not have a lot of people in them?
Midwest.
Okay. Midwestern United States. Okay. What else?
Siberia.
Canada. Okay. Siberia, Greenland, Iceland. What's that all about? Why are there not lots and lots of people living up in, I don't even know what part of Canada it is. This would be like New Brunswick, the Maritimes, Yukon. Right? Why are there not a lot of people up here? Why is there not a lot of people up here? What's that ecological, what is the environmental factor that determines it's too damn cold, right? You might not have too many days that are frost free in a given year. Okay? Well, it's not cold here. What's limiting populations there? Pretty hot here. Pretty hot here. Right? What's limiting right in here? What, you know, what's found on this part of the earth? Oh, the Sahara Desert, right?
It's too hot.
It's too hot, and this part of Australia, it's a desert, it's dry. People need water, right? For all of our activities, we need water. You can't manufacture water like Matt Damon does on the Martian, right? This doesn't work like that. Okay, so this is ecology. These are the things that determine the distribution. That tells you like spatially where organisms are, and the abundance, how many of those organisms there are. That's ecology. Humans are just another organism. Now, we do some, we'll talk about this, we do some pretty cool things where we can live. Look at the density of people in the Southwest. Right? Mexico, Arizona, it's pretty damn dry there, right? But we do things like damming up rivers and draining them so they don't even make it to the ocean. We can drill big giant wells and pump water out of the earth. So we can manipulate our environment more than other animals can. Right? Other animals, it's just sort of like if there's either water, there's not. We can really sort of change the earth to get water. Okay, so okay, where the heck did this go? But humans are really one of those animals that we so we're both, the earth affects us and we affect the earth. Okay? We have had a huge impact on the face of the earth. Just look at, I mean, what are some huge impacts that humans have had? Are there enough humans on the earth to really affect this whole huge planet? That's really kind of the underlying question here. Are our activities enough to alter the whole? The earth's a pretty damn big place. Right? There's some big impacts that humans have had. You go anywhere in the ocean, the most pristine place on earth in the ocean, and you go swimming in there, what are you going to find floating around? Plastic. There's probably, I think it won't be long, and it may have already surpassed. There are more pieces of plastic in the ocean than there are fish. Right? So yes, we have profoundly altered, right, the Earth's resources, water, vegetation, the air quality, right? But this gets into this idea of environmental problems. Okay, so we need to understand ecology in order to understand environmental problems. But it's a social science too. Because is that a problem? Is it by definition a problem that there is so much plastic in the ocean? No, right? It depends on your values. It depends on ethics. Right? This is a philosophical question. And that's why there's no right answer at the ballot box, right? This is why there's not one absolute answer when you go to vote, because it depends on what your values and your ethics are, okay? So it becomes a little more complex than ecology. We're going to focus on the ecology, right? On the personal level, we do things every day that affect the earth, right? A huge one, we'll talk about this, is diet, what you purchase. You cannot spend money without burning oil, right? I saw, when I was in school, the place I went to school was really crazy about all this stuff. People were choosing not to have children, right? This one guy wrote a whole paper. It was called The Environmental Consequences of Having a Child in the United States in 1998 or something. And he calculated, if I have a child, bring a person into this world in the United States, how many tons of concrete am I going to create demand for? How many tons of wood? How much gasoline? How much water will be needed to support this little person in their lifetime? Right? It's interesting to think about. How big your house is, and so on and so on and so forth. Right? These things that we do are related to this whole. And again, I promise you, I'm not here to tell you what to do or what to think. I just like to lay out, here are the consequences, and then you make a choice, right? I'm not here to be an activist. Okay, so ecology, these factors that go into determining the abundance and distribution of organisms can be broken down into these two kind of groups of factors: biotic factors, abiotic factors. Okay, what are these ones versus those ones? What would be biotic type factors? What do you think, Sam? Just based, not anything specific, but what can you tell me about this word versus that word? Biology. What's biology? The study of what? Life. Okay, so these are living factors. These are not living factors. Okay. Biotic things. So again, take humans, for example. What are some biotic things that affect our distribution? What about things like bacteria? What about things like disease organisms? Right? They can limit where we live. Right? I'm assuming at one point in our history, things like predators probably affected humans where they live. Right? Not so much anymore. We killed them all. Right? Abiotic factors. These are things like temperature. We talked about that when we talked about like the Siberia, right? Light is a huge one, right? Not so much for humans, although this obviously affects humans. We talked about melanin and skin color, and about how this is related to our genetics, where water is found, minerals, air, all those kind of things. These are the type of things. So biotic things would be like predators, competitors, diseases, prey items. These are all living factors that go into determining whether or not you find an organism in a given place. Okay? If there's too many predators, you're not going to find them. If there's not enough prey, there's too many diseases, right? Abiotic things, again, are non-living factors that determine soil nutrients, all kinds of, these are really the big ones. They limit the abundance and distribution of organisms on the earth. Okay. Biotic and abiotic factors. Okay, we'll look at this this idea of hierarchical organization. And this is kind of like one of the aspects of living things is that they organize into these hierarchies or these different levels. We can go below this. Organisms are composed of organ systems, which are composed of organs, which are composed of tissues, which are composed of cells, right? But in this theme, we've kind of did a lot of that already. We're going to start at the organism. Right, so that's an individual, maybe, I don't know, we'll call it like a black bass or a largemouth bass. Population, what's that relative to the organism? It is a interbreeding group of the same species of organisms. So one black bass, here's a population of a bunch of black basses that are interbreeding and making babies and so on and so forth. Okay, that population is all one species though. Okay. Could be all the humans in a given place. Could be all the red cedar trees. The community is all of the bass, all of the ducks, all of the turtles, and all of the plants So it's a bunch of different species in one place at one time. Okay? One species, multiple species interacting with each other. When we go to this level, what are we adding in when we go from community to the ecosystem? We're adding in the abiotic. We're adding in the soil, the water, the air, and then when we get to the biosphere, it's everything combined. Here's the thing about the biosphere. This is the Earth. Biosphere is this really, really razor thin. All of the life that exists on Earth is just in a tiny, tiny little layer on the outside of the planet. Okay? Razor thin. I've heard this estimates, like if you start in the center of the Earth and you had like some kind of little boring machine, you just started going up, it would be like days and days and days of just rocks and magma and all that stuff, right? Can't really dig to China because it's really hot in there. You started going, and then you'd be like, if you blinked your eyes, you would have gone through all of life, and then you'd be up in the atmosphere, right? So really, all this millions of species of life that occur on Earth live in this little thin layer in this biosphere. Okay, and these things occur and organize in sort of predictable fashions, and ecologists can study at any level within here. Okay, so just because you're an ecologist doesn't mean you study the biosphere level. Well, let's look at those different layers. So, organismal ecologists, they study individual organisms and how they interact with their environment. So you might study this salamander and try to understand how they absorb water from their environment and how that determines what kind of habitats they can live in. So you're focusing on one individual animal and their adaptations that they have. Okay? One individual animal. A population ecologist looks at, maybe they're studying, this looks like maybe an emperor penguin, and you want to know how many babies they're having, how quickly they reproduce, the number of penguins in a given rookery over time. You may study, but you're not studying their prey items and those other parts of the thing. This is just looking at this individual species and how the individual penguins of that species interact with each other. Okay. So a lot of times, if you're studying, so say, and this is the case with these penguins are declining, and this is a common theme across lots and lots of different species of animals right now, is that there's decline. So population ecologists would try to understand why populations are going down, try to find a way to deal with those specific issues. Right? Maybe bald eagles used to be very rare, and the population ecologists figured out it's because the eggs were getting thin, and when the mother sat on the eggs were cracking or hatching, so there was a failure of reproduction. So the way that they dealt with this was they eliminated a type of pesticide, and now we have bald eagles all around here. So this is a lot of times endangered species focuses on this population ecology level. Community ecology. What kind of, that's not animal, is it? Probably. Like black-footed ferret. So this would be the study of the ferrets and how they interact with each other, but also how ferrets are being affected by predators. Maybe how ferrets are being affected by diseases. Maybe how ferrets are affecting prairie dogs, and when they decrease prairie dog numbers, how that affects the plants. So here at the community ecology level, you're bringing in multiple different species. It doesn't, not just species of animals, it can be on different levels from predator. Remember the food web thing from like 4th grade? That's community ecology. Okay. How these different levels in a food web interact. Ecosystem ecology. Some things on the slide here different from the last, right, between community and ecosystem ecology. We start bringing in things like nutrients, water, sun. This, that's the ecosystem level, includes the biotic and the abiotic. Okay? Ecosystem ecologists study, I don't know, you might study how there's amphibians breed in the pool, right? But when they grow and they metamorphose, what do? Oftentimes they go from a tadpole that eats all this plankton in the pool. They grow up and turn into a little tadpole, and then they grow into a little baby frog, and that little frog hops out into the forest, and guess what it brings with them? All the nutrients that were in this pool. So they transport lots and lots of nutrients out. These watering holes are really important in these African plains. Right? So how does that affect the density of gazelles and wildebeest and kudzus and all these things, and where they live? So that's the ecosystem level of remote control. And then even all the way to the biosphere level, right? This is when it gets so incredibly complex. If you study at this level of ecology, you are doing lots of heavy math, right? This is big scale, large data modeling, right? All of the ecosystems combined add up to the biosphere. Okay, this is all living things, the ocean down into the core of the earth. And there is a lot of amino acids. It's relatively thin, but I heard this famous ecologist once say, there's this, at least when I was young, the Cold War, there was this kind of fear that, we'd get into a nuclear war with Russia, and that we would wipe the life off the face of the earth. He said, totally ridiculous. You could detonate every nuclear bomb simultaneously all around the world, and there would be life down inside of the mantle, down inside of the soil, percolate back up and repopulate that eventually. Right? But there's lots and lots of life on there. And we talked about this. These are those abiotic factors that largely determine. This is plant productivity around the earth, and we see these tropical places like the Amazon basin, equatorial Africa, incredibly productive spots. There's lots of sunlight that occurs at the equator. There's a lot of water at the equator, lots of nutrients, incredible diversity of plants and animals. That's the biosphere level. Okay, so some things that are kind of commonalities here, right? That are just general rules of ecology. One is that all organisms need some energy. Right? Living things are defined by their metabolism, acquiring energy and transforming it. We talked about photosynthesis. What does photosynthesis do? It takes carbon dioxide, it turns it into a sugar. And then all of life uses those sugars power their activities, okay? So ultimately, where does all the energy on the earth come from? Where does the energy come from that's coming up, that's powering our projector up here? Where does the energy come from? When I turn this on, where did that energy come from ultimately? Where's all this incredible energy I'm feeling in this room come from? I'm just kidding about that. Where's the energy? Okay, where does the electricity come from? How do we produce this electricity? What do you think here?
It'll come from the sun.
Ultimately, is it written on there?
Solar energy from the sun.
Okay, solar energy
Yeah.
comes from the sunlight, but where do we get our, unfortunately, this is probably not solar. Where do we get, how do we get our electricity? We probably burn coal, right? But what's coal? Old dead plants and stuff. It's the same sugars that we've been talking about. It's just they've been fossilized and compacted and turned, or we burn oil when we get in a car, right? What are we burning? That's old hydrocarbons made through photosynthesis, right? Ultimately, all of our energy comes from the sun. It just cycles through all these different things. Right? So solar energy, for the most part, there's some other weird stuff that happens, like thermal vents deep in the ocean that provide some of the energy for some organisms. But we eat plants. The plants got their energy from the sun, right? And most energy ultimately comes from the sun, and that can limit how many plants and animals live in the place. Temperature, huge one. Okay, and this is kind of gets at probably most directly climate change will affect. Climate change is going to affect all of these things, though, right? It will affect light, it'll affect water, but most directly it affects temperature, right? And so we see there's below 0 degrees, there are some things that can live. They're very well adapted. Above 45 degrees, and this is probably what's 45, like 120 degrees or something. There's not a lot of life that can survive above 120 degrees. Okay, so there's a range in there. And really, it's not between 120 and 0. Those are like death on one end and death on the other. But really, think about humans. If we go back to this, I don't even know if it's still up. Yeah, here it is. This temperature, what is the perfect temperature you guys think for humans?
Honestly,
What is it?
75 and 70 with a nice breeze.
Okay. And so you think about if you, one thing I love about these fall weekends is I love to be outside and working. If you gotta work, if it's too hot, it really limits how much energy you have, right? So think about the really productive parts of the world are usually like in these temperate places, right? It definitely affects. And even I'm from the north, and there's always been a stigma against the south. People are lazy, people are, not good workers, this and that. But could it be because it's like 100 damn degrees down here?
Mm-hmm.
And that there's other thing that affects this too, is that if you look at the infection rates of people with parasites down in the south compared to the northeast, only 1 in 4 people have intestinal parasites in some parts of the southeast. Is that gonna affect your energy levels? Bet your ass, right? And same thing with temperature. So these things, we don't even really think about them, but it absolutely affects all aspects, right? And so temperature is a huge one. And one of the big things, and this is true with fevers, right? Why does your body spike a fever? As an immune response, right? So you get exposed to COVID and you get a fever. You have meningitis, you get a fever. Flu, What's the fever all about? Why is that a good response for your body?
Isn't it fighting infection?
But how does it do that? It isn't fighting infection. It is fighting infection, absolutely. Snakes do the same thing. If a snake gets infected with a fungus, they'll crawl out in the heat of the sun and try to get really, really hot. But why does it, why,
It kills it from its top.
viruses, bacteria, all of these things have a sweet spot too. So if you bring them out of their sweet spot, they are less likely to be able to reproduce, right? But at some point, right, and I've been at this point with my children, you get up to like 104 degrees fever, start getting really freaked out, right? What's the danger of really high fever for a person? Is these things called enzymes. I don't even know if it talks about them, but they're, yeah, okay. So these are the little molecules in your body that make your chemistry work. And if the enzymes start breaking down, your organs start to fail. Right? Those enzymes actually start to unfold and they don't do their job, and then your kidney can't do its job. Then you're screwed. Right? So this temperature and physiology and how the body works, very critical, aspect. Okay. Some organisms can only really operate in cool temperatures. This is the, you guys know what this little guy is? For all of the points on test 6. The American pica.
What?
A pica? They're like a little rodent, kind of like a hamster or something. They live only in mountains in the western United States. Why do they live in mountains? Because you go to the top of the mountain, it's cooler there, right? And so they are adapted to cold conditions, and at hot conditions, they have all kinds of problems. They get all kinds of parasites. They have all kinds of diseases, right? So animals and plants are adapted to specific temperatures. And then, of course, water is probably, the most obvious factor. This is, again, an abiotic factor that regulates ecology. Both for aquatic organisms, but so say you're a fish, one thing that is happening now is the balance of salt water and fresh water can change, right? And so even aquatic organisms are affected by water balances. This is talking about solute concentration. That's how much salt is in the water. For organisms that live on the land, right, almost always desiccation or drying out is the big issue. Okay? All organisms need water. Some organisms can live in deserts, but they have these adaptations that allow them to be really water efficient. But how do we get rid of our waste? We urinate it out, right? How does a snake get rid of its waste? Do you ever see snake poop? It's like a crystal. Almost no water at all. Right? Reptiles, when they void their waste, they concentrate it into this really almost toxic stuff. Or chicken poop too. Chickens don't pee, right? They just concentrate all the waste that they get from eating into this. That white stuff is this called uric acid. Right? So watertight covering. So for example, these amphibians that you see on the bench over here, they have a porous skin. If I take the little salamander and put it here, it immediately starts losing water, and it's going to dry up till it's just like a little shriveled up thing. But a snake out here, it doesn't do that. Why? Because they have scales that keep the water in. We have hair, birds have feathers, right? All those things are partly about reducing water loss. Plants have waxy layers. If you look at cactuses, they have this really thick, waxy leaves to keep the water in. Okay. And it all comes down to the cell, okay? if you have just the right amount of water, the same amount of water going in as going out, you have this balance. If you drink enough water and you've had enough salt in your diet, then your blood cell looks like this, nice lozenge shape blood cell. This is when, and again, this is not really an issue, except for probably certain demographics. I won't say it's only males, but probably males. I won't say it's always in the fraternity house, but it's probably in the fraternity house. People drink like 3 gallons of water in like 5 minutes or something. There's so much water in the blood plasma relative to the inside of the cell. The water rushes into the cell and it pops. Right? That can cause some real serious problems.
There's some people that drown, like, inside drinking too much water.
Yeah.
Does it happen a lot?
This?
Mm.
No. It's you've got to really be doing something like pretty extreme, because again, what normally happens is your body senses, like, there's a lot of water in our plasma. So what does it do? Your kidneys take it out and put it into your bladder and you urinate, right? But if the amount of water going into your system is more rapid than can be removed by your excretory system, then this can happen. Probably much more commonly, we have not enough water in your plasma. Water leaves your blood cell starts to shrink up like this, and this is like, it's the worst feeling. Huh? Like 14 beers the night before with like a teaspoon of water, and you wake up, your brain's like stuck to the side of your skull, and you think you'll never drink again, and I hope you never do drink again. This is probably what your blood cells look like, right? Or if you don't water a plant, what happens? They start to wilt. That's because, same thing, plants they don't have bones, they actually use the pressure of the water pushing out on the cell walls to maintain their posture. Right? So if you don't water your plants, then that starts to shrink away and they start to lose their, it's called Kircher pressure. Okay. So water, very critical abiotic factor in determining. Right, so yeah, there's just some of the adaptations that organisms have to maintain water. Inorganic nutrients, this is things like nitrogen, phosphorus, especially for plants. This is why you can't grow certain crops in certain places. You have to put fertilizers because there's a lack of these nutrients in the soils. Okay, so how do organisms deal with limiting factors, right? So it's starting to get cold here, right? It's my hometown was 11 degrees the other day. For some animals, that's too cold. So you have a couple of choices to how to adjust to this seasonal changes, right? Or even over the course of a day. So a lot of birds, what do? They just fly. The part of their brain, when called the photoperiod, starts to change and the balance of light and dark starts to change, part of their brain just tells them, like, you need to start flying this direction towards South America. So that behaviorally, they migrate. Some organisms migrate into the earth, right? Some organisms love this time of year, and during the summer, they're down inside of the earth because it's too hot during the summer. But others, birds have an anatomical response, so their anatomy changes. Rather than move and leave, they just grow some more insulation. Right? They grow a new set of heavier feathers. Physiologically, and you'll see this in the morning, particularly cold mornings. Let's see. What's going on here? This guy has his beautiful North Face down jacket on here. Right? What's this all about? It's trapping a layer of air close to the body metabolizes, it generates heat, trap that heat, that's what jackets do, right? Blankets, anything like that, it's about trapping that warm air close to the body. This is a physiological response. Okay? So they all can work, it just depends on what strategy is. Acclimation, we can become acclimated to a change, kind of environmental change. But here's the key things about this, is that it is a gradual and reversible adjustment. So and let's look at some examples of this. Well, we looked at the bird fluffing his feathers. Another example of this, I don't know if you guys have ever been to like Denver or places that are real high altitude. Have you been, Savannah? It's a horrible feeling. I've been up in Tibet and you just feel sick. Right? First day you go, you just feel like you're hungover all the time. But eventually your body starts, because there's not enough oxygen, but eventually your body starts to produce more red blood cells, and so you can acquire more oxygen, and so you start to feel better. But then as soon as you move back down to the lowlands, this is a reversible change, okay? So that's acclimation, a physiological change, right? And it can reverse back. Birds and mammals, because they produce their own temperature, their own thermal energy is produced from the inside. That's us, we are. Another way of saying this is warm-blooded, but it's kind of a misnomer because a lot of reptiles actually have really warm blood too. But the difference is the temperature comes from the outside. They're ectothermic. They get their energy, their heat energy from the sun. Okay. So acclimation is different. We're going to talk about an adaptation, how animals can become adapted to environmental change, but that takes a lot longer. You're going to see the difference between that. Okay. The acclimation. So what's the story here? If you want to see lizards, where are you going to go in the U.S. and why? Where's the best place to see lizards in the United States and why? According to our ecological principles we've been learning. I'm not giving you guys an answer. Oh, what do you think? This is going to be a new tourism thing called lizard tourism. We're going to go on lizard tours. Where are we going to go? This can be one state. Mexico. New Mexico. All right, let's go. I was born in Albuquerque. Lots of cool lizards. Southern New Mexico. Why is it? West Texas. What is it? Okay, so it's warmer, and but I would say actually we get just as much. This maximum temperature in Georgia is probably just as high, but the minimum temperature is lower. So the range in temperature is less in this part of the country. Okay. So it's just more of like a, particularly like Southern California, it's just like that 75, 80 degrees long. Okay. Yeah, here.
That's where I live, in Southern California.
Oh,
And-
you did?
Yeah, I live there currently.
Oh, you do? You're from
Yeah,
there? Okay.
and we have like huge lizards that are huge. I've never seen lizards that
Probably
big.
chuck walrus.
Yeah, they're huge. I've
Like
never seen
this?
anything. No. I mean like lizards, like outdoor lizards. Not those lizards. Those I feel like aren't even called lizards, but like lizards, like you know how we have the little ones,
Okay.
they're like that, but they're like this one.
Oh, okay.
They're huge.
Oh, skinks, maybe? But yeah, this is like the rattlesnakes and lizards and stuff. It's Mecca. This is a beautiful, beautiful place. And I mean, that's why everyone wants to live in Southern California, right? Because it's not like so extreme temperatures. Like here we have Georgia. Anatomical. So changing the shape or structure of the body. Okay? And this actually, so this is an example of acclimation. We know this, that even like our dogs, because dogs have not been domesticated that long, they're almost wild animals. Right? And we know that at a certain point in the summer, they start to shed their summer coat and they produce a winter coat. Right? We can also have a change in color. Right? Snowshoe hares change to be white in the summer, or in the winter rather. Brown. So these are anatomical. Okay. It's encoded in the DNA. The Arctic fox is a good example. Or behaviorally, okay? Those lizards that we've been talking about, how do they maintain a relatively constant body temperature? Is behaviorally. So they move around. Okay? In the winter, you can find lizards in the winter too. But they're going to be down inside the leaf litter. They can move and just get a little patch of sun. So shuttling between the sun and the shade, migration, and this is not just birds, but things like reindeer, buffalo, a lot of mammals make huge migrations too, to deal with temperature changes, to deal with water changes, right? And so this is really where humans, if you think about humans, we're really not that tough, right? Physical strength wise, we're pretty weak. We don't have like claws or teeth that are really formidable, but we really excel in the you know, being adaptive is in these behavioral type responses. So you can look at how things happened in Georgia back in the day was the way we built houses, you know, when people are at work, all kinds of behavioral type of responses. Right. And it's remarkable. Humans have overcome a lot of things based on their behavior. Okay, so that is the first lecture. I'm going to upload this to EagleWeb along with the slides. And we'll see how this works. Appreciate you guys' attention, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. Don't get COVID. This is why everyone wants to live in Greece, because it's freaking beautiful. It's like temperate.
I want to go to Greece.
I do too. So how did you end up here, Kira, from Southern California?
So I actually grew up down in Savannah,
Okay.
and I